Okay, let's talk about legal citation. Have you ever just stared at a footnote, totally confused by all the rules? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. Today, we're going to demystify how to cite secondary sources using Canada's gold standard, the McGill Guide. Let's be real for a second. Footnotes and bibliographies can be an absolute nightmare. And it's not just about getting the formatting right for a professor or a judge. Your credibility, your entire argument, can hinge on this stuff. The stakes are actually pretty high, but don't worry, we're here to help. The best part is, pretty much everyone feels this way at first. And here's the secret. Legal citation isn't some kind of mystical art form. It's just a system with a clear set of rules. Once you learn the patterns, it's a skill you can totally master. And that's exactly what we're going to do today.
So where do all these super important rules actually come from? Well, in Canadian law, there's really one main source you need to know.
This is it, the McGill Guide. It was first published way back in 1986 by the students at the McGill Law Journal. And since then, it's become the national standard for pretty much everyone in the legal field across Canada. Think of it as the official rulebook that makes sure we're all speaking the same language when it comes to citations. Now, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, let's quickly talk about why we even do this. It really boils down to three things. First, you've got to give credit where credit is due. That's just basic academic honesty. Second, you need to leave a clear trail of breadcrumbs so your reader can find your exact sources. And third, and this is the big one, it proves you've done your homework, which adds some serious weight and authority to your arguments.
All right, time to get practical. We're going to start with the classic secondary sources, the kind of stuff you'd find in any law library.
So, the scholarly monograph, which is really just a fancy way of saying a book by one author on a really specific topic. This is a cornerstone of legal research, and the McGill Guide gives us a super clear, consistent way to cite it.
Okay, let's break this down, because this shows the basic pattern for a lot of things. You've got the author, then the title, which you'll notice is in italics. That's a key formatting rule. Then you have any editor info, the place and publisher, and the year. And finally, you see that pinpoint? A pinpoint is basically the GPS coordinate for your source. It tells the reader the exact page or volume you're talking about so they don't have to go digging. Every single piece has its place.
Next up is something you're going to use all the time, the Law Journal article. This is where all the latest debates and cutting-edge legal analysis happens, and its citation format has a few unique quirks you need to know about.
So notice the big difference here. The year is in parentheses. Now, why is that? Well, in law journals, the volume number, 67 in this case, is what really matters for finding the article. The year is just considered helpful secondary info, so it gets tucked away in parentheses. After the volume and issue, you've got the abbreviated journal title, like Sask Law Rev for the Saskatchewan Law Review, and then the page number where the article starts.
Okay, let's talk about legal encyclopedias. And we have a very practical tip here from legal researcher Tjaden. He points out that, yeah, the print versions exist, but let's be honest, the legal world has moved online, and the McGill Guide totally gets that. It encourages us to cite the digital versions.
And this really drives that point home. The big Canadian legal encyclopedias, like the Canadian Encyclopedic Digest and Halsbury's Laws of Canada, are now these dynamic online resources. They get updated all the time, they're searchable, they're just way more practical than those old heavy print volumes.
And the citation reflects this online reality perfectly. You start with the encyclopedia's title, and you make sure to note that it's the online version. Then you put the specific topic title in quotation marks, and finally, that pinpoint reference, which, as you can see here, often includes a subtopic and a very specific paragraph or section number to get your reader to the exact spot.
Okay, now we're moving into what can feel like the Wild West of citation, sources that were born digital. And this brings up a huge challenge. How do you possibly cite something that might not even be there tomorrow?
So what do you do about a web page that could change or just vanish? The solution is an absolutely brilliant tool called perma.cc. What it does is create a permanent archive snapshot of a web page that can't be changed. The McGill Guide is a huge fan of this and strongly recommends using it to fight what's called link rot and make sure your citations work, well, forever.
For most online sources, there's a pretty simple, basic pattern to follow. You start with the author, title, and date, just like you would for a print source. Then you add the word online, followed by the URL inside those angle brackets, and, this is the crucial part, that perma.cc archived link right at the very end.
And as you can see from these examples, that basic pattern is incredibly versatile. It works for just about anything, from a journal article you found online to a government report.
The key things to remember are that online label and that all-important archived link. They give digital sources the clarity and permanence they desperately need.
Let's look at a blog post. Here's one from Michael Geist. You see all the usual pieces, author, title, date, but check out that extra little detail, online blog. The guide says it's a good idea to add the source type in parentheses if it helps the reader, and it definitely does here. And of course, you wrap it all up with a URL and the perma.cc link.
Okay, now this one might surprise you, but in today's world, yes, even a social media post can be a totally valid, citable source. And you guessed it, the McGill Guide has a rule for that too.
The format for this is very specific and actually pretty clever. You use the author's name or their handle, and then you quote the first sentence of the post. If it's a really long sentence, you can just shorten it with an ellipses. Then comes the date, the direct URL to that specific post, and, if you can get one, an archived link. It's a really smart way to capture a source that could disappear in an instant.
Okay, we've broken down the rules for a whole bunch of different sources. Now, let's zoom out and cover some practical, high-level tips that will help you put all of this into practice and start citing with total confidence. Honestly, these 4 tips will save you a world of headaches. First, and this is the most important one, when in doubt, look it up. Don't ever guess. Second, the citations that online databases generate for you, they're a great starting point, but you always have to double-check and edit them. They are almost never perfectly formatted. Third, a super common mistake. Never use superscript for ordinals like 10th or 2nd. Just type them out normally. And finally, if you find some really weird source that the guide doesn't cover, just relax and focus on being consistent and making it as clear as possible for your reader.
And that brings us to our final big picture question. We've seen how tools like perma.cc are trying to pin down these online sources. But as information becomes more and more fluid, always changing, the very idea of a fixed permanent citation is being put to the test. So how are we going to make sure that the sources we rely on today are still going to be there for the legal minds of tomorrow? That right there is the critical challenge for the future of legal scholarship.